I'm completely hopeless at it. I was a really bad actor at school, and I've never been able to master the art of mimicry. But my husband, he does it brilliantly. He can do all the voice.
After Camilla allegedly attempted to humiliate Catherine using private information, King Charles stepped in and everything changed. The morning sun bathed the gardens of Clarence House in light, but inside Charles's private study, the atmosphere was heavy as he sat quietly reading the day's papers. Harsh headlines were nothing new to him, yet this time felt different. The attacks were aimed squarely at Catherine, sharp and unfair words dissecting her every gesture and expression. A tight knot formed in his chest as he read, knowing she had done nothing to deserve such treatment. His thoughts drifted back to the first time William brought her home, standing politely by the door, handbag in hand, visibly nervous yet composed, and even then, Charles had seen something rare in her, warmth, steadiness, and quiet strength, reminding him not of appearance, but of his mother's character. To the public, Catherine appeared flawless and unshaken, but Charles understood the immense pressure she bore in silence. As he folded the paper and set it aside, he realized this was no ordinary cruelty but a calculated attack, and those responsible were about to learn she was not alone. The ringing phone shattered his thoughts. It was William, his voice tense and stripped of warmth, warning that the media assaults were intensifying and that whispers were emerging from inside the family, private details leaking that no outsider should know. Charles felt his jaw tighten. The timing and precision of the stories confirmed his growing fear, especially as his own health faltered. These were not random attacks, they were meant to wound her. Calmly, he told William to come for lunch, insisting this was not a conversation for the phone. After hanging up, Charles glanced through the tall window toward the palace library wing, where Camilla stood near a bookshelf speaking softly to an aide, her smile easy and her posture relaxed, yet Charles knew better than most how comfort could mask calculation. When William arrived later, the strain was unmistakable. His face drawn, shoulders heavy, confidence shaken, he sat across from his father and spoke quietly, revealing that Catherine had broken down the night before. She tried to stay strong, William said, but he could hear her crying. The latest article had crossed a line, accusing Catherine of being a bad mother simply because they needed help with the children. It was cruel, and worse, it was disturbingly precise, referencing details they had only ever discussed in private, even spiraling into claims that she had secretly adopted another child. Charles reached for the bottle and poured 2 drinks, ignoring the hour, knowing some moments demanded it. "Tell me exactly what they wrote," he said evenly, though his eyes burned with anger, as William unlocked his phone and read aloud. The article declared that Catherine was unsuited for royal life, that her approach to motherhood was already showing consequences, particularly for Charlotte, and went on to allege she made serious family decisions alone, including bringing another child into the household without proper consent. Each sentence landed like a blow. The piece then questioned how the Prince of Wales could manage a future shaped by such supposed instability, asking what kind of queen struggled so openly and what kind of woman destined to wear the crown could not even raise her own children. William stopped reading, his hand trembling as he locked the screen, while Charles stared ahead, his chest tightening. He had seen some of the coverage, he admitted slowly enough to disturb him, but not this, and if it unsettled him so deeply, he could only imagine what those words were doing to her. With every sentence, Charles felt his patience slipping away. The article did more than judge Catherine's parenting. It ridiculed her upbringing, questioned her intelligence, and implied she never truly belonged. The most painful passage, however, described a private dinner where Catherine had spoken honestly about struggling after Charlotte's birth. William lowered the phone, his voice subdued as he noted that only a handful of people had been present: himself, Charles, Catherine, Harry, and Camilla. No one spoke after that. The silence pressed down on the room, heavy with a truth no one was ready to name, and within it, something shifted that would change everything. Finally, William leaned forward, his hands clenched until his knuckles whitened, and asked what they should do next, admitting Catherine was exhausted and considering stepping back from public duties in the hope that disappearing might make the attack stop. He shook his head, knowing better, knowing they would only find another way in. Charles rose and paced the room, the familiar motion helping him think as his mind raced through risks, consequences, and the fragile threads holding the family together. Then he spoke carefully, pointing out that his wife had never concealed her discomfort with Catherine's popularity, her remarks about the cameras and the warmth of the crowds lingering in the air. William looked up sharply, asking if he believed she was responsible, and the question hung between them. Charles answered slowly, insisting they needed proof. Suspicions alone were not enough in their family. They talked for a long time, examining every possibility and every person with access, until a plan finally began to form. Guessing and delay had gone on too long, If someone inside the family was feeding stories to the press, the truth would have to be uncovered quietly and carefully. Before William left, they agreed on what would happen next. Charles would share a small, believable detail with Camilla, something private, almost incidental, nothing dramatic, just enough to invite repetition. If that same detail surfaced in the press, there would be no doubt about the source of the leaks. William hesitated before standing, turning back with his face drawn in worry as he asked what would happen if they were mistaken, if they accused the wrong person. Charles met his son's gaze for a long moment, his expression steady and shaped by years of hard lessons, before answering that they would face that truth when it came. But if they were right, he would not ignore it, and Catherine would not be harmed by someone inside the family, because that line could not be crossed. That evening, the plan was quietly set in motion during a calm, informal dinner with no staff nearby, just Charles, William, and Camilla seated together as they often were when privacy mattered. The conversation began with routine matters, letters, appointments, small details of the day, while Charles remained alert, waiting for the right moment. When it felt natural, he casually mentioned that Catherine had been under immense pressure and was considering something new, an idea centered on children's emotional health. Camilla paused, her fork hovering for a brief second before she resumed eating, saying she hadn't known. Charles replied easily that nothing was settled, that Catherine was unsure whether the timing was right but felt strongly enough to consider speaking quietly at a small overseas gathering, nothing official. Camilla listened closely, her expression neutral yet intent, remarking that she had assumed Catherine was avoiding new commitments, to which Charles calmly agreed before adding that some subjects were too important to ignore. They moved on to other topics, filling the space with ordinary conversation, but something had shifted. Camilla grew restless, glancing at her phone more than once, her attention drifting in and out of the discussion as the evening continued. Charles noticed everything, and 3 days later, the proof arrived. He was sitting alone with his morning drink when his private secretary entered without the usual warning, a breach of protocol that immediately signaled something was wrong. The secretary placed a newspaper in front of him, explaining it had been published that morning, and Charles needed only a glance to understand. The headline declared that Princess Catherine was set to step back from royal duties amid growing pressure. As he read on, every detail he had shared in confidence was exposed. The timing, the doubts, the private struggles, laid out as if someone had been in the room with them. A slow, heavy weight settled over him, not anger, but something quieter and sharper, a deep disappointment born from the realization that trust, once broken, could not easily be repaired. Something fundamental had shifted, a breach that could never be undone, and Charles felt it in his bones. He closed his eyes briefly before reaching for the phone. When William answered, Charles said simply that it was done, and William replied that he had seen it too, his voice controlled but strained. There was no denying it now, and when William asked what would happen next, Charles straightened in his chair, his tone calm but resolute, saying he would address it directly and that things would change. Catherine would not be left exposed again. After the call ended, the palace carried on as usual, footsteps echoing and doors opening and closing, time moving forward, yet for Charles the moment marked a clear divide, a line after which nothing would be the same. With that understanding, he acted, knowing his next move would change everything, and by the following morning, he sat quietly in his study, his thoughts heavy, preparing to confront his wife about the betrayal that had cast a shadow over his family, while Catherine was likely at home, unaware of what was about to unfold. Catherine, at home with the children, had no idea that the mystery tormenting her had finally been solved, and William's words lingered in Charles's mind. The tears, the sleepless nights, the way her joy had been slowly worn down by months of calculated cruelty. The ringing phone broke his concentration, and when he answered, Catherine's voice sounded light but strained, the effort to remain cheerful barely masking the tension beneath as she thanked him for speaking with William and for his support. Charles softened instantly, telling her she would always have his support, that she was family now, his daughter, and that he would always protect his children. After a pause, Catherine's voice returned, heavy with emotion, as she wondered aloud what she had done wrong and why someone within their own family would want to hurt her. A pang struck Charles's chest as he assured her she had done nothing wrong and promised that the person responsible would face consequences. When the call ended, Charles sat in silence, reflecting on a marriage shaped by years of struggle against public opinion and private strain, knowing that his loyalty to Catherine, to William, and to the principle that family must protect its own outweighed any personal comfort. By late afternoon, he could no longer delay. Camilla returned from a charity event humming softly, unaware that Charles was waiting in the sitting room with the morning newspaper folded neatly on the table. When she remarked that he looked serious, he replied evenly before telling her they needed to discuss Catherine. A flicker of surprise crossed her face as she asked why, and Charles calmly placed the newspaper where she could see the headline, stating that the story contained details he had shared with her 3 nights earlier, details that were entirely false. Color drained from her face, though she straightened and denied understanding what he was implying. Charles corrected her quietly but firmly, saying he was stating a fact. She was the source of the leaks that had tormented Catherine for months, betraying the trust of the family and inflicting real pain on someone he considered his daughter. The room fell into silence, broken only by the ticking mantel clock, as Camilla's hands trembled reaching for a glass of water, and she whispered that he didn't understand what it felt like, the endless comparisons, every appearance and photograph, the narrative that Camilla looked tired while Catherine shone, that the future queen outshined the current queen consort. "Oh, you know what that feels like?" Camilla asked, and Charles felt a tangled mix of disappointment, anger, and sorrow for the woman he had once loved, whose insecurities had twisted into cruelty. Quietly, he asked if she had truly chosen to destroy Catherine, to feed reporters, to turn private family moments into stories that made a young mother cry herself to sleep, fearing her children would one day read lies about her, and at last Camilla's composure collapsed. She insisted it had started small, just correcting stories that made her look bad, but admitted the press wanted more and the money was tempting, a point Charles repeated softly as she hesitated and claimed she thought she could control it, that most of it went to charity. Feeling the full weight of his years as he stood, Charles told her to pack a bag and move to the guest quarters, explaining that the next day they would discuss her immediate removal from royal duties and residences. When she begged him to reconsider, promising she could stop the stories, he replied firmly that the only thing she could do now was leave his family alone, because she had caused enough harm. After she left, Charles bowed his head over his desk, the toll of illness heavy on him, yet his resolve unbroken. Family always came first. That night, alone and looking toward the library where Camilla had sat earlier, he felt an unexpected sense of peace as the moon rose over Clarence House, knowing he would begin restoring trust, that Catherine would feel safe and William could finally rest. A message from William confirmed it. Catherine had slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, and Charles smiled, certain he had made the right choice, understanding that protecting family often required sacrifice. The following morning was unusually quiet as he awoke alone, the empty space beside him a reminder of the night before, and dressed in the navy suit Catherine had once complimented, knowing the day ahead would demand patience and diplomacy. At breakfast, his private secretary appeared uneasy, explaining that the Queen Consort's secretary was requesting a meeting, claiming there were circumstances Charles did not understand and information that could change his view. Charles set down his fork and instructed him to schedule the meeting for 11, then call William and ask him to bring Catherine at noon because it was time she heard the truth for herself, and by 10:30, Camilla's desperate voice could already be heard echoing through the corridors. When James announced her arrival, Charles steadied himself as Camilla entered wearing a cream dress clearly chosen to evoke happier memories. Her eyes red yet her posture defiant. She thanked him for seeing her and said she wanted to explain, claiming that 6 months earlier a reporter had approached her, insisting he already had sources and would publish stories regardless, suggesting that if she provided context, the coverage might be more balanced. Charles questioned that word sharply as Camilla insisted she believed she was protecting Catherine by offering details meant to soften public judgment, admitting the press insisted on paying her, most of which she claimed went to charity, with some kept for minor personal expenses. Charles looked out at the garden, roses blooming in stark contrast to the chaos inside, and told her that regardless of intent, she had betrayed Catherine's trust by sharing her private struggles. Camilla pleaded that she had lived in Catherine's shadow, constantly compared, feeling invisible beside the future queen, her voice edged with venom that hardened Charles's expression as he named the truth plainly: jealousy, not protection. As she admitted wanting recognition, Charles reminded her she was meant to be a partner and senior family member, not someone who inflicted harm. When James announced William and Catherine's early arrival, Camilla grasped Charles's arm and begged him not to tell Catherine, but he removed her hand and said firmly that Catherine deserved the truth, even if Camilla's feelings did not survive it. Hearing Catherine's laughter from below only sharpened the moment, and when Camilla lashed out with a cruel remark, Charles's last affection vanished as he ordered her to pack and leave. Moments later, he met William and Catherine, told them the leaks were over, and revealed Camilla's role, explaining that jealousy and resentment had driven months of torment. Catherine's tears reflected relief as much as pain, reassured by Charles's firm declaration that she had done nothing wrong and that Camilla would face consequences, including removal from Clarence House and the beginning of divorce proceedings. Though the public later saw only vague statements and a carefully managed silence, Camilla's eventual return to palace life was not reconciliation but quiet punishment stripped of influence, closely monitored, allowed to exist without power, and invisible but relentless consequence designed by Charles to reinforce a single truth: Within royalty, loyalty outweighs ambition, and betrayal, even from within, is never without consequence.